Well, hello there, HW here. Interesting post over on the Fractal Forum. Liquid profiling is a blatant infringement on my patent. That's from the Fractal Audio account. And the way it says my patent, I got to assume that that is Cliff. I believe Cliff has posted from this account many times. And also it says my patent. Now this is interesting. So this all started because someone posted my video, a video that I made about liquid profiling, where I showed a portion of the sit-down interview I did with KEMPER, where we talked about liquid profiling, this new update coming to the KEMPER. Kind of showed what it was and what it does. And I'll tell you what liquid profiling is the way I understand it, having had my hands on it. In a nutshell, liquid profiling is this. It's the same profiling process that has existed already. However, you now have the option to use 40 tone amp models, I guess we call them, or tone, I would call them tone stack models. But they're models of the tone stack. They're not models of amplifiers, meaning you can't plug in and get any sound out of them. They don't do anything in terms of creating sound. You can't get the sound of a super reverb or plexi or whatever from these models. These models only model the interactions of the bass, middle, treble, presence, cut, gain, whatever's on that amp. That's what it models. You still are using your existing profiles or profiles that you create. It seems to be the same profiling technology, but now with more options for tone stacks and gain knobs added on top. That's very important to note because the KEMPER has always had a gain control, a bass, middle, treble. It's always had a tone stack, but now it's going to offer us 40 new tone stacks to apply to our profiles. And those are intended to give us a more authentic feel what it's like with that amp. So those have been modeled after normal channel of a super reverb, vibrato channel of a super reverb, plexi bright channel, plexi normal channel, so that you can match whatever type of amplifier you have profiled with maybe more appropriate or more accurate gain controls. So it's more of the same thing. We already had an EQ and a gain knob. Now we get an EQ and a gain knob with different values that are, I guess, derived from looking at those real world amplifiers. We also have the option to apply that model to the profile and tell the profile where those knobs were when it was profiled. That's liquid profiling. It's applying a new, more accurate tone stack, more accurate to the actual amp being profiled, not just a generic tone stack. Does that make sense? I hope so. So I wanted to see if there was any infringement going on here, if there was any, I don't know, this says that it infringes on their patent. So I wanted to find out. So I went and did a patent search for Clifford Chase and Fractal Audio Systems, and I found 3. And I'm going to show you all 3 of them. The first of which is this one right here. It's digital signal processing using a combination of direct and multiband convolution algorithms in the time domain. I don't believe this is what we're talking about because this talks about a convolution process, which I don't believe is being used at all in applying these tone modeled, this new liquid profiling. This has to do with IRs and latency and full length IRs. And I don't think this is the applicable patent. So we're not going to look at that one. There's another patent that has to do with automatic amp matching. And I don't quite think this is the patent, but just in case it is, I want to run through this patent real quick. And I think it'll help us understand kind of what's been patented. There's 2, I think, applicable patents here that could be in this discussion. So here's the abstract of the automatic amp matching. An amplifier or other device under test, DUT, that is the real world amplifier in this example, may be automatically modeled. A first simulation model of a first device is provided. So you have the DUT, the device under test, that would be a real world amplifier. And you have the first simulation model. That would be the model of amplifier that exists in the Fractal or in a Line 6 unit or whatever, a digital model of a guitar amp. Those are the 2 things we have, and this is what the patent is talking about. You have these 2 things, the real amplifier and a digital model of it. One or more processes may be used to measure characteristics of the DUT, device under test, which is the real amplifier. The characteristics including 2 or more of equalization, gain, distortion, and compression. The measured characteristics of the DUT are compared with the characteristics of the first simulation model. So this is describing comparing a real-world amplifier with a first simulation, a digital modeled amp. The corrective data is used along with the first simulation model to create a corrected model. The corrected model may be used to filter input signals where the DUT is an amplifier, sounds produced by the instrument coupled to the one or more processors produce a sound resembling that of the instrument played through the DUT. To sum that up, let's look at one of the figures provided here. So in this figure from the patent, you see the first simulation model of first device, then measure two or more characteristics of the device under test, meaning measure something from the real-world amplifier, compare the measured characteristics of the DUT with characteristics of the first simulation. So find how these two things are different. Calculate corrective data based on the comparison. Create a corrected model based on the corrective data and the first simulation model. So this is a patent that seems to be about protecting the process of taking a tone model, a first simulation device, as it's called here, and a device under test, a real-world amplifier, comparing them and comparing compression, gain, distortion, equalization, or any two or more of those, and creating the corrective elements that need to be applied to result in a sound identical to the DUT. Basically taking one of the fractal amp models, applying some corrective behavior, some corrective method by changing distortion, gain, whatever, and resulting in a sound identical to the amplifier. This may be what we're talking about. However, I would just point out that the KEMPER does something very different in that I don't believe there is what we would call a first simulation model. Now, I've heard many people say the KEMPER has like 7 base models. It matches it with one of those, and then it match, and then like a closest one, and then it does some adjustments and makes the KEMPER profile. And basically, you don't realize it, but you're playing one of 9 models, one of 7 models. I don't believe that would be true, or else this patent would have stopped them, I believe, from being able to do such a thing. I don't know that, but I've only heard that claim from people kind of in the fractal world. And I've heard that claim from, I believe, from Fractal Audio. My understanding was that claim had been made by Cliff. I don't have a site for that. But so correct me if I'm wrong. If that wasn't Cliff who said that, or that wasn't someone at Fractal. That was something I first read on the Fractal Audio boards. I've seen it there a lot. I believe I've seen it commented on by I think by this Fractal account. I could be wrong though. So it's never something that I've taken seriously. I've always taken it with a grain of salt because I don't understand how, if that were true, this patent wouldn't have stopped KEMPER from existing, or this patent would have been granted after KEMPER existed, because this came out in, I think, 2016. It's also important to note that the status of this patent is abandoned, and that means it either wasn't pursued any further, wasn't kept up, the fees weren't paid. Patents can be revived, but this, according to Google anyway, this patent is abandoned. There's also one more patent we could look at. Now, this patent is similar, but the wording is different. This is amplifier matching in a digital amplifier modeling system. So the abstract reads, in one example, a method to match a digital amplifier model to a real amplifier comprises obtaining an amplifier output filter and an amplifier input filter for the real guitar amp, using the amplifier output filter and a model output filter to obtain a corrective output filter, using the amplifier's input filter and a model input filter to obtain a corrective input filter. Applying the corrective input filter and corrective output filter to the digital amplifier model. The amplifier output filter and the amplifier input filter can be obtained using exponential sine sweep and a matched filter. Other examples and related methods and apparatuses are also disclosed herein. So what's interesting about this is this patent has some different wording, and instead of matching characteristics of the sound, that is matching gain, EQ, compression, from an existing first simulation model to a device under test, as we saw in the last one, instead of talking about changing 2 or more of those to match a real-world device under test, this speaks more about a process by which you could take a real-world guitar amplifier and a digital guitar amplifier. In this one, it actually says real guitar amplifier and digital amplifier model, and that's also going to be important. And this talks about the method of applying an input filter before and after something that's going to be referred to as a non-linearity. So let's look here at what this patent is kind of talking about. So here in this this image here, this figure that accompanies this patent, so it's part of the patent. So we have an in and an out. This is a real guitar amplifier that is referred to here, referenced with the number 100. Real guitar amplifier. And amp modeling pointing down to derive this large box denotes a large digital modeling system, and within that, a digital modeling amplifier, and within that, an input filter, a nonlinearity, and an output filter. Meaning here are the 2 things that we're talking about in this patent. Okay, we're talking about a real guitar amplifier and then a digital modeling system that contains a digital amplifier model that contains an input filter, nonlinearity, and an output filter. Looking further at figure 2, we see the process by which these 2 units sort of derive a third thing, or this really describing the process. So we have that input filter, non-linearity, and the output filter, and an amp matching correcting, showing that, what are we applying? Well, we're applying it now a corrective input filter and a corrective output filter to the input filter and the output filter, and applying those before and after the non-linearity, and then combining that to create a new corrected input filter and corrected output filter. So, as I said, this patent seems to be speaking about taking a real guitar amp and a digital model, which this patent sort of describes as being having an input filter, a nonlinearity, and an output filter, and applying some corrective filter to those input and output filters to create a new input and output filter, which would identically show, which would be identical to the real-world amplifier. There's some interesting stuff here in the description, too, I want to touch on. Modern digital modeling of guitar amplifiers has been nearly perfected. Perceived inaccuracies, however, still exist due to differences between a model of the amplifier and the given sample of the actual amplifier. These differences exist due to a variety of factors: component tolerance, aging and drift, parasitic components due to wiring and a layout variation, especially in point-to-point and other hand-wire topologies, variations in speaker impedance, changes. This actually describes right here the background, why this is patented, actually, and why this thing exists. Actually, to me, describes why I prefer a process like tone matching, a process like profiling, a process like amp capturing, whether it be a neural amp modeler, neural DSP, quad cortex, or Tonex, why I actually prefer that over just amp modeling. And that is, the plethora of different variations of amps that exist out there is so wide, it's difficult to expect one team to hit it all. Now, with respect to Fractal Audio, they are hitting it out of the ballpark in terms of who's doing the most. I mean, it is them, right? It's not Line 6 comparatively. Fractal Audio just gives you so much more in terms of models and things and the updates. And it's not Quad Cortex either, although they have some great models too. But it really, Fractal is by far above everyone else in terms of a modeling company that continues to make models and supporting new stuff and putting out new stuff and all these things. They are creating, and they seem to be very in touch with their user base. As we see on the Fractal forums, right? Cliff is commenting directly to users here and commenting around things. I don't think he consulted with a lawyer before he said this, right? So there's a very direct access between the company. I applaud that. I think it's I think if you're in that world, that's really great. It's a cool thing to be able to get access and bounce ideas off of the people making the thing you use so much. But this, to me, is why I prefer being able to capture an individual thing, because component drift, parasitic components due to wiring, tolerances. All these things mean that whenever you model one amplifier, you have a model of that amplifier. And if you want that to be a different amplifier, like if you want that 65 super reverb to be a 68 super reverb with different speakers, or a very particular set of speakers, or someone's worn in set of speakers, you're not going to be able to do that unless you use some process like tone matching, some process like profiling, which is why they have this patent, right? Now, it's important to note this patent is active, and this patent says anticipated expiration, which is a date here in 2040. This seems to be just recently renewed in 2021, or it's a new patent. I guess I'm not sure what happened here, why this patent, I think this patent replaces the old patent. But I wanted to look at both of these. So I believe this is the patent that we're talking about here. And I think the biggest thing to point out is Cliff hasn't said anything else. Fractal Audio hasn't said anything else but this, and this post is still up on their forum. So I guess they still feel that way. But what I would point out as the most obvious thing here is that liquid profiling has nothing to do with matching a real world signal to a real world guitar amplifier, what in the last patent was called device under test, to a first simulation, according to the last patent, or this patent, because this is the one we're talking about, a digital amplifier model. This liquid profiling does not change the process that is most similar to this patent in the KEMPER. So my question would be, if the KEMPER violated this patent, how was this patent awarded in 2021? How was it granted on November 2nd, 2021? And how does liquid profiling have anything to do with this? I don't think it does. I could see how if someone skimmed through my video, they may have thought KEMPER had built-in amp models, and that then when you profiled an amp, it matched it to a particular amp model. I could also understand how someone who does that process might think that's a more accurate process. I don't know if that's a more accurate process than profiling. I have no empirical evidence either way. I just know that when I profile an amp, it sounds like that amp. And I know that if you tone match with the Fractal, it sounds like that amp. I've used both systems. I'm left scratching my head here of where is the blatant infringement. I'm not a patent attorney. This advice is worth what anyone paid for, which is $0. I'm not an attorney. I don't read patents for a living, but I've read all of these patents in their entirety. I've read all the descriptions, all of the background. I've had to look up what a lot of these terms mean. I looked and found the old patents and figured out which were active and which were not. I'm over here going, it looks like there's a patent that replaced an old patent that now applies to the process of taking an existing digital model and a real world amplifier, comparing the two, specifically around creating a corrected input filter and output filter, applying that to the existing input and output filters, and creating a sort of matched, tone matched thing. I don't see how liquid profiling has anything to do with that. Liquid profiling is simply, to simply put it, is it revolutionary? Maybe for tone, or maybe for KEMPER users, but what it is, hey guys, you know that tone stack we gave you with the gain knob and everything, and the generic one? We gave you 40 others, and those 40 others should match real world amps. Have at it. That is liquid profiling. And we have the ability to tell the profile, or the KEMPER, where do you want me to, where is this default sound? Where should I apply these EQs? Where is 0? If you tell it it's at 6, 6, and 8, it'll do that. If you tell it it's all at 5s, it'll do that. I'm scratching my head here going, I don't see what this has to do with this patent. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm not an attorney. I'm just kind of interested by this situation, especially because it was my video in there. So I'm always flattered when people watch, especially when they're kind of famous people like Cliff. And so let me be clear about something. My hat's off, literally, to Fractal and their team. I have no hate. I think a lot of people think I'm like Mr. KEMPER. I must hate everything else. Not at all. I believe we're one big digital modeling family. I applaud everybody. I think the FM3 and the FM9 units are beautiful additions. I have no ill will towards anybody. I am not like trying to be a shill. I wish everybody the absolute best. This is just two people in this digital space that I'm very interested in, kind of commenting about each other. And so I wanted to share my thoughts as I've been sort of looking into this. HW, out.